"Who hurt you?" the Alpha King whispered. By morning, half the pack was dead. The banquet hall smelled of roasted venison and fear, but the silence was the loudest thing in the room. Tiberius Crestfall, the Alpha King, didn't shout. He didn't roar. He simply stopped walking. His hand, large and scarred from a century of wars, hovered over the trembling shoulder of the girl kneeling in the shattered glass. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her bruised cheek, his touch terrifyingly gentle. "Who hurt you?" he whispered. No one answered. But by dawn, the snow outside the hall would no longer be white. The winter wind in the northern territories didn't just bite, it chewed. Leora Faircrest felt it gnawing at her exposed knuckles as she scrubbed the stone steps of the Alpha's manor. The water in her wooden bucket had turned to slush an hour ago, but she dared not stop. To stop was to be seen, and to be seen was to be punished. "You missed a spot, Runt." The voice was like syrup laced with arsenic. Leora didn't look up. She knew the polished leather boots standing inches from her nose. Novella Thornlake, the Beta's daughter, and a creature who wore cruelty like a second skin. "I will clean it, Novella," Leora murmured, keeping her eyes on the grey stone. "You'll clean it when I say you're done." Novella kicked the bucket. The slushy grey water splashed over Leora's thin, threadbare dress. The cold hit her skin like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. Leora didn't gasp. She had learned long ago that reacting only made the game more fun for them. Behind Novella, a giggle erupted. Merelda Ashwell, Novella's shadow and sycophant, stepped forward, wrapping a fur-lined cloak tighter around herself. Look at her shiver. It's pathetic to think she has Faircrest blood. Her parents must be rolling in their shallow graves. Leora's grip on the scrub brush tightened until her knuckles turned white, but she swallowed the retort, burning in her throat. Her parents had been heroes, warriors who died defending the pack borders, but Alpha Uriel Darkwood had rewritten history to suit his paranoia. Now, Leora was simply the daughter of traitors, the pack's punching bag, kept alive only because pack law forbade killing a wolf without a trial, unless they died of natural causes. Freezing to death on the front steps seemed to be Uriel's preferred method for her this week. "Leave her!" A deep voice boomed from the doorway. For a flickering second, Leora felt a spark of hope, but it died instantly as she recognized the speaker. Alpha Uriel Darkwood stood in the entrance, a goblet of wine in hand. He wasn't saving her. He simply didn't want his view of the driveway obstructed. "The king arrives within the hour," Uriel growled, adjusting the heavy gold chain around his neck. "I want this filth out of sight. Throw her in the cellar. If King Tiberius sees a jagged little thing like her, he'll think I can't feed my own pack." Novella smirked, grabbing a handful of Leora's matted hair and yanking her upward. Leora stumbled on numb feet. "You heard the Alpha. To the cellar, rat." As she was dragged through the servants' corridors, away from the warmth of the great hearths, Leora caught her reflection in a passing darkened window. She looked ghostly, pale skin stretched over sharp cheekbones, eyes too big and too haunted, and a jagged scar running from her collarbone to her shoulder, a souvenir from Uriel's signet ring 3 years ago. She was 22, yet she felt ancient. She had no wolf, at least not one that had ever shifted. The trauma, the pack healer had sneered, had broken her connection to her beast. She was a dormant wolf, weaker than a human, lower than dirt. Novella shoved her into the damp darkness of the root cellar and slammed the heavy oak door. The lock clicked. "Don't make a sound," Novella hissed through the wood, "or I'll come back down there and finish what the Alpha started." Leora sank onto a pile of burlap sacks, pulling her knees to her chest to preserve heat. In the silence of the dark, she listened. She could hear the frantic heartbeat of the house above her. Servants rushing, silver clinking, the heavy thud of barrels being rolled. The Alpha King was coming. Tiberius Crestfall, the wolf of the Black Moon. Legend said he was 300 years old, sustained by ancient magic and the blood of his enemies. They said he had no heart, only a burning coal where it should be. They said he killed alphas for incompetence and leveled packs for insolence. Leora closed her eyes. Let him come, she thought, a singular, dangerous tear tracking through the grime on her face. Let him burn it all down. The arrival of the royal convoy shook the ground. Even in the cellar, Leora felt the vibration of the armoured SUVs and the heavy tread of the royal guard. The Silverfang pack was powerful, but they were nothing compared to the High Council's elite. Hours passed. The temperature in the cellar dropped. Leora drifted in and out of a shivering sleep, dreaming of fire. Suddenly the door burst open. Light flooded the space, blinding her. It wasn't Novella. It was Catriana, the head cook, a stout woman who had slipped Leora extra bread scraps when Uriel wasn't looking. "Get up, child! Hurry!" Catriana hissed, her face pale and sweaty. "What? Is it morning?" Leora croaked, her voice unused. "No, it's disaster. 2 serving girls fainted from the Alpha King's aura. Just dropped like stones. Uriel is furious. He needs bodies to move wine. Put this on." Catriana threw a bundle of fabric at her. It was a standard serving uniform, black wool, white apron. It was clean, which was a luxury Leora hadn't known in months. "Catriana, I can't," Leora whispered, her hands shaking as she pulled the dress over her freezing limbs. "Uriel said, Uriel is drunk and terrified," Catriana snapped, though her eyes were kind. "The king, he's not what we expected. He's quiet. It's making everyone nervous. Just keep your head down, pour the wine, and get back to the kitchen. Do not look him in the eye. Do not speak. Be a ghost." Be a ghost. That was easy. Leora had been a ghost her whole life. She followed Catriana up the stairs, the noise of the banquet hitting her like a physical wall. The great hall was packed. Every high-ranking member of the Silverfang pack was there, dressed in velvets and silks, dripping in jewels that they had bought with money skimmed from the territory taxes. But the room felt suffocating. The air was heavy, charged with static electricity. It was the aura of the king. Leora took a heavy pitcher of dark red wine and stepped into the hall. She kept her gaze fixed on the floorboards, navigating through the sea of tables. She could smell the fear on her packmates. It smelled like sour milk. But beneath that, there was another scent. Rain. Ozone. And something distinct, like cedar wood burning in a winter hearth. It was intoxicating. It made the wolf inside her, the one she thought was dead, stir in its slumber. She moved toward the head table. Uriel sat there, looking smaller than usual. To his right sat a man who made the very air around him ripple. Leora didn't mean to look. She intended to pour the wine into Uriel's glass and retreat. But as she tipped the pitcher, a hand, large, tanned, and terrifyingly strong, slammed down onto the table. Uriel jumped. "My king!" Tiberius Crestfall did not look at Uriel. He was staring at the empty space where the air was shimmering. Then, slowly, he turned his head. Leora froze. He was massive. Even seated, his shoulders were broad enough to block out the light from the chandelier. His hair was the colour of a raven's wing, brushed back from a face that was severe, beautiful, and scarred. But it was his eyes that trapped her. They were gold, not the muddy yellow of a common wolf, but molten, burning gold, with vertical slit pupils that blew wide as they landed on her. Leora's breath hitched. The pitcher in her hand trembled. "Careful, girl," Uriel snapped, noticing the waver. He reached out, his fingers digging viciously into the fresh bruise on her arm, hidden beneath the sleeve. Leora gasped, the pain sharp and sudden. The pitcher slipped, Red wine cascaded across the table, splashing onto the pristine white tablecloth, and, to everyone's horror, splattering onto the cuff of the Alpha King's black tactical suit. The entire hall went silent. The music stopped. The eating stopped. Even the fire seemed to hush. Leora fell to her knees, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. I am sorry, You clumsy bitch! Uriel roared, rising from his chair. The fear of the king had curdled into rage at the embarrassment. He raised his hand, heavy with rings, to backhand her across the face. Leora flinched, closing her eyes, waiting for the blow. It never landed. A sound tore through the room, a low, vibrating growl that shook the stained glass in the windows. It wasn't human. It was the sound of a predator so apex that nature itself bowed. Leora opened her eyes. Tiberius had caught Uriel's wrist in mid-air. The king hadn't stood up. He hadn't even looked at Uriel. His golden eyes were still fixed on Leora, wide with an emotion she couldn't name. Shock? Horror? Recognition? "My king," Uriel stammered, his face draining of colour. "Forgive the incompetence. She is a broken thing, a servant. I will have her discipline." "Varian," Tiberius said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth as velvet wrapped around a jagged rock. From the shadows behind the king, a lean man with silver hair and dual blades strapped to his back stepped forward. Varian Mistfall, the king's second. "Sire, if this man speaks again before I give him permission," Tiberius said, his eyes never leaving Leora's face, "remove his tongue." Uriel snapped his mouth shut, trembling so hard his chair rattled. Tiberius released Uriel's wrist with a dismissive shove and stood up. He towered over the table. He rounded the corner, his heavy boots silent on the carpet, until he stood directly in front of Leora. She couldn't breathe. The scent of cedar and rain was overwhelming now. It wrapped around her, making her dizzy. Tiberius crouched down. He was now eye-level with her, ignoring the wine staining his cuff, ignoring the hundreds of people watching. "Look at me," he commanded softly. Leora forced her chin up. She expected anger. She expected death. Instead, she saw the king's nostrils flare. He inhaled deeply, as if he were trying to memorize her soul. His gaze dropped from her eyes to her neck, then to the bruise Uriel had squeezed, and finally to the old, jagged scar peeking out from her collar. The gold in his eyes darkened to a storm-tossed amber. The temperature in the room plummeted 10 degrees in a second. Frost began to creep across the wine glasses on the tables. "What is your name?" he asked. "Leora," she whispered. "Leora Faircrest." Tiberius closed his eyes for a moment, a muscle in his jaw jumping. "Faircrest, the family that died defending the northern pass." "Yes, my lord." "And you?" He opened his eyes, and the violence in them was so profound that Leora wanted to weep. "Why do you smell like pain, Leora?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the stone arches above them. "Why do you smell like pain?" Leora opened her mouth, but no words came out. How could she explain 10 years of hell? How could she explain the starvation, the beatings, the cold cellar, the way Novella and Merelda treated her like a toy to be broken? She didn't have to answer. Her silence spoke for her. Tiberius reached out. His hand, large enough to crush her skull, moved toward her face. Leora flinched instinctively, shrinking back. The movement shattered Tiberius's composure. A snarl ripped from his chest, so loud and guttural that half the guests dropped their cutlery. Tiberius froze his hand in mid-air, forcing himself to stillness. "I am not going to strike you," he said, his voice strained, as if he were holding back a tidal wave. "I would burn this world to ash before I struck you." He gently, so gently it felt like a prayer, cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed over the smudge of dirt on her cheekbone and the fresh welt forming where Uriel had grabbed her. The contact sent a shockwave through Leora's body. It wasn't pain. It was a jolt of pure, unadulterated power. Her dormant wolf, the one that had been silent for years, suddenly threw back its head and howled in the back of her mind. Mate. The word echoed in her soul. She gasped, her eyes widening. She looked at Tiberius and saw the same realization crashing into him. The king of all wolves, the immortal warlord, was her mate, and she was the broken servant girl of a corrupt pack. Tiberius felt the bond snap into place. He felt her fear, her exhaustion, her deep, aching hunger. But mostly, he felt the history of her pain. It flooded him, a montage of every hit, every insult, every frozen night she had endured. He slowly stood up, pulling Leora with him. He didn't let go of her hand. He turned to face the room. The hall was deadly silent. Tiberius looked at Uriel Darkwood. The Alpha was sweating profusely, his eyes darting between the king and Leora. "You told me," Tiberius said, his voice eerily calm, "that the Faircrest line was extinguished. You told me there were no survivors." I thought it best, my king," Uriel stammered, standing up, his hands shaking. "She was weak, broken, a runt. I took her in out of charity. I gave her a home." Charity? Tiberius repeated the word, as if it tasted like bile. He took a step forward, dragging Leora gently behind him, placing his body between her and the pack. "You smell of expensive wine and roasted meat, Uriel. She smells of mildew and old blood. You call this charity?" "She is undisciplined," Novella Thornlake's shrill voice cut through the tension. She stood up from a nearby table, unable to help herself. "She's a clumsy, useless thing. She deserves the cellar." Tiberius's head snapped toward Novella. The motion was so fast it blurred. "The cellar?" Tiberius asked. He looked down at Leora. He saw the dust on her dress, the grey tint to her skin that came from living without sunlight. He turned back to Leora, ignoring the room again. He lifted her chin, forcing her to look at him. He needed to know. He needed the catalyst. "Who hurt you?" the Alpha King whispered. Leora trembled. Tears spilled over, hot and fast. She looked at Novella, who was sneering. She looked at Uriel, whose eyes promised retribution later. She looked at the scars on her own arms. "All of them," Leora whispered brokenly. The silence that followed was absolute. Tiberius nodded slowly. "All of them." He turned to Varian. The silver-haired warrior was already drawing his twin blades, a grim smile on his face. "Varian," Tiberius said, his voice devoid of humanity. "Seal the doors." "Done, my king," Varian replied, signaling the royal guard stationed at the exits. The heavy iron bolts slammed home with a sound like a gunshot. Panic rippled through the Silverfang elite. "My king, please!" Uriel cried out, backing away until he hit the wall. "This is a misunderstanding. We can explain. She is lying. She is mentally unwell." Tiberius released Leora's hand, only to take off his heavy, fur-lined cloak. He wrapped it around her shoulders. It engulfed her, warm and heavy, smelling of him. It was a shield, a claim. "Cover your eyes, Leora," Tiberius murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Do not look." "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice shaking. Tiberius turned back to the room. His eyes were glowing so bright they illuminated the dark corners of the hall. Claws, black as obsidian and sharp as razors, extended from his fingertips. The air pressure in the room dropped until ears popped. "I'm going to rewrite the history of this pack," Tiberius growled, the sound vibrating in the floorboards. "Starting with the Alpha." He lunged. The scream that left Uriel's throat was cut short by the sound of tearing meat. Leora squeezed her eyes shut and pulled the king's cloak over her head, burying her face in the scent of cedar and rain. But she couldn't block out the sounds of glass breaking, tables overturning, and the wet, terrible noise of justice being served by a monster who loved her. The dawn did not break. It bled. When Leora finally opened her eyes, the world was impossibly quiet. The screaming had stopped hours ago. The wet, tearing sounds that had haunted the darkness while she huddled under the king's heavy fur cloak were gone, replaced by the howling of the wind against thick window panes. She wasn't in the cellar. She wasn't in the servants' quarters. She was lying in a bed large enough to sleep a family of 4, buried under blankets of velvet and cashmere. The room smelled of cedar wood, rain, and the metallic tang of fresh blood, faint, scrubbed away, but present. Leora sat up, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her serving dress was gone, replaced by a silk shift that felt like water against her skin. "You are awake." She flinched, pulling the sheets up to her chin. Tiberius sat in a high-backed leather chair by the fireplace, watching her. He had shed his armored tactical suit for a loose white linen shirt and dark trousers, but the menace of him remained. He looked like a god of war resting between battles. "Where am I?" Leora whispered. Her voice was raw. "The Alpha's master suite," Tiberius said, his golden eyes tracking her every micro-movement. "Though Uriel will not be needing it anymore." Leora looked toward the window. The heavy curtains were drawn, but a sliver of light pierced through. Is everyone dead?" Tiberius stood up. The movement was fluid, predatory. He walked to the bedside table and poured a glass of water, offering it to her. "Not everyone, just the ones who needed to be." Leora took the glass, her hands shaking so hard the water rippled. "You killed them. I heard them screaming." "I removed a cancer," Tiberius corrected gently. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to touch her yet. Uriel Darkwood was not an alpha. He was a parasite. Those who stood with him, his enforcers, his torturers, those who laughed while you froze on his doorstep, they have paid the price for their cruelty. "Half the pack," Leora breathed, the realization settling in her stomach like lead. "You killed half the pack." "And I would kill the other half if they looked at you wrong," Tiberius said, the truth of it ringing in the room like a struck bell. He reached out, his fingers hovering near her face. "Leora, do you understand what you are to me?" She stared at him. She was a dormant wolf, a runt, a servant. He was the Alpha King, a creature of legend. "I am your mate," she whispered, the word feeling foreign and dangerous on her tongue. "You are my soul," he corrected. "For 300 years I have walked this earth alone. I have conquered kingdoms, I have toppled tyrants, and I have felt nothing but the cold, until I walked into that hall and smelled you." His hand finally made contact, cupping her jaw. His skin was fever-hot. "I smelled your pain before I smelled your wolf. It called to me, and when I saw what they had done to you..." His eyes darkened, the gold swirling with shadows. Mercy was no longer an option. Leora leaned into his touch despite herself. She was starved for it. "What happens now?" "Now," Tiberius said, standing up and offering her his hand. "We go outside. The survivors are waiting." "I can't," panic flared in her chest. "Novella, Merelda..." "Are currently in irons," Tiberius said, his voice turning icy. "Waiting for your judgment." He pulled her from the bed. Leora stumbled, her legs weak, but he caught her effortlessly, scooping her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "You can," Tiberius agreed, carrying her toward the door. "But you never have to walk alone again." The courtyard of the Silverfang Manor was a landscape of red and white. The snow, pristine only yesterday, was churned with mud and blood. The bodies had been moved, piled onto pyres in the distance, sending plumes of black smoke into the grey sky. The surviving pack members, mostly the young, the elderly, and those who had been too low-ranking to participate in Uriel's corruption, knelt in the slush. When Tiberius emerged onto the stone veranda, carrying Leora, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. He set her down, but kept an arm wrapped possessively around her waist, anchoring her. Varian Mistfall stood at the bottom of the steps, his dual blades clean and sheathed. Beside him, kneeling in the snow with their hands bound in silver chains, were Novella Thornlake and Merelda Ashwell. They looked nothing like the tormentors of yesterday. Novella's expensive dress was torn, her face streaked with soot and tears. Merelda was shaking violently, her eyes fixed on the ground. "My king," Varian said, his voice projecting across the courtyard. "The pack awaits your command. The traitors are dead. The leadership is vacant." Tiberius looked down at the crowd. "Silverfang!" His voice boomed, requiring no amplification. "Your alpha failed you. He rotted from the inside out, and he took the best of you with him. But the rot is cut out." He turned to Leora. "This is your pack now, little wolf. They answer to you." Leora felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. She felt small. She felt broken. But then she looked at Novella. Novella looked up, her eyes filled with hate and terror. "You can't do this," she hissed, though her voice wavered. "She's a runt. She can't lead. She can't even shift." Tiberius growled, a low rumble that made the kneeling wolves flinch, but Leora placed a hand on his chest, stopping him. She stepped forward, leaving the safety of the king's hold. The cold wind bit at her silk shift, but she didn't shiver. She walked down the steps until she stood directly in front of Novella. "I cleaned your boots yesterday, Novella," Leora said softly. Novella spat at her. The saliva landed on the hem of Leora's dress. The crowd gasped. Varian stepped forward, his hand going to his sword, but Leora held up a hand. "You think power comes from fear," Leora said, her voice gaining strength. "You think because I cannot shift I am weak. But I survived 10 years of you. I survived the cellar. I survived the cold. I am still here." She looked at the kneeling pack. "Uriel ruled by fear. He killed my parents and lied about it to keep you loyal. He made you complicit in his cruelty." She turned back to Novella. "I will not kill you." Novella blinked, confusion warring with relief. "Death is too easy," Leora continued. "You wanted me to be a ghost? Then you will be one." Leora looked at Varian. "Strip them of their rank. Exile them from the manor. They will work the borders. They will clean the latrines. They will eat only what they earn. And if they speak one word of disrespect to any member of this pack, you may take their tongues." Novella's face went white. To be a servant, to be lower than the dirt she had treated Leora like, was a fate worse than execution for a high-born wolf. "Leora, please!" Merelda sobbed, throwing herself forward. "I was just following orders. Novella made me." "And you enjoyed it," Leora said coldly. "Take them away." Varian nodded to the guards, who dragged the screaming women toward the servants' quarters, the very path Leora had walked 1,000 times. Leora turned back to Tiberius. He was watching her, and for the first time she saw something other than rage or possessiveness in his eyes. She saw pride. He walked down the steps and took her hand, raising it high. "Behold your queen!" Tiberius roared. "Long live the queen!" Varian shouted. "Long live the queen!" The pack echoed, first hesitantly, then with a desperate, hopeful fervor. But as the cheers rose, Leora felt a sudden, sharp pain in her chest. It wasn't emotional. It was physical, a burning sensation right over her heart. She stumbled, her vision blurring. "Leora!" Tiberius's voice sounded far away. The burning intensified, spreading through her veins like liquid fire. She gasped, clutching her chest. "She's collapsing!" Varian yelled. Tiberius caught her before she hit the snow. "Leora, look at me!" But Leora couldn't look. The world was spinning, and in the darkness of her mind she heard a voice. Not Tiberius's. Not her wolf's. It was a voice, ancient and cold, whispering from the shadows of her bloodline. The contract is sealed. The infirmary was chaotic. Healers were running back and forth with vials of herbs and enchanted salves, but Tiberius stood in the center of the room like a stone monolith, his aura so volatile that the glass jars on the shelves were cracking. Leora lay on the table, pale as death. Black veins were crawling up her neck, pulsing with a dark, necrotic rhythm. "What is it?" Tiberius demanded, grabbing the head healer by the collar. "Fix her." I don't know, my king," the healer stammered, terrified. "It's not poison. It's magic. Ancient magic. It's coming from inside her." "Inside her?" Varian asked, stepping closer to the table. He looked at the black veins. "That looks like a blood curse." "The fair crests," Tiberius whispered, releasing the healer. "Uriel said they were traitors. He said they died defending the borders. But why would he keep Leora alive and torture her if she was just a traitor's child? Why not just kill her? Unless keeping her alive was the point," Varian mused. "Sire, look at the pattern of the veins." Tiberius looked. The black lines on Leora's chest weren't random. They were forming a sigil, a seal. "It's a suppression ward," Tiberius realized, horror dawning on him. "Someone bound her wolf. They didn't just break her connection, they locked it away with dark magic." "Why?" "Because," a rasping voice came from the doorway. Tiberius spun around, a growl ripping from his throat. Standing there, flanked by 2 royal guards who looked dazed, was an old woman. She was bent over a gnarled staff, her eyes milky white with blindness. It was old Mara, the pack historian, whom Uriel had banished to the woods years ago. "Mara," Tiberius said, his claws extending, "speak. The Faircrest bloodline is not just warrior blood, Alpha King," Mara rasped, hobbling into the room. "It is the blood of the moon callers, the white wolves." The room went silent. Even the healers stopped moving. "White wolves are a myth," Varian said, though he sounded unsure. "They went extinct 1,000 years ago. They were the only ones who could challenge the Alpha King's dominance." "Precisely," Mara said. She pointed a crooked finger at Leora. "Uriel didn't hate her because she was weak. He feared her. He knew that if her wolf ever woke, she would be more powerful than him. More powerful than the High Council." She turned her blind eyes toward Tiberius. "Perhaps even more powerful than you, King of Shadows." Tiberius looked back at Leora. The black veins were reaching her jaw now. She was convulsing. "The bond broke the seal," Mara explained. "When you claimed her, your power shattered Uriel's wards. But the magic is fighting back. It is trying to kill her before she ascends." "How do I save her?" Tiberius demanded. "Tell me which, or I will tear this building down." "You cannot save her with strength, King," Mara said softly. "You must save her with submission." Tiberius froze. "Explain." "Her wolf is dying because it is starving for power to fight the curse. You must give her yours. Not just a transfer of energy. You must submit your wolf to hers. You must let her feed." "If he does that," Varian interrupted, stepping between them, "it could kill him. If she drains him, he will become the dormant one. He could lose his immortality." "He asked," Mara shrugged. "That is the price of a white wolf. They demand everything." Tiberius didn't hesitate. He didn't look at Varian. He didn't look at Mara. He only looked at Leora, whose breathing was becoming a ragged rattle. "Clear the room," Tiberius commanded. "Sire, think about this," Varian started. "Out!" Tiberius roared, the sound shattering every window in the infirmary. The healers and guards scrambled over the broken glass to escape. Varian hesitated at the door, looking at his king with grief, then bowed his head and left, dragging Mara with him. Tiberius was alone with his dying mate. He walked to the table and climbed onto it, lying beside her. The heat radiating from her was enough to blister skin. but the cold of the black veins was worse. "Leora," he whispered against her ear. "You asked if I would burn the world for you." He took her hand and placed it directly over his heart. He could feel his own beast raging, terrified of what he was about to do. Submission went against every instinct of an alpha. It was contrary to his very nature. But then he looked at the scar on her neck. He remembered the smell of her pain. "Take it," Tiberius whispered, closing his eyes and lowering his mental shields. "Take it all." He pushed his power into her. Leora gasped, her back arching off the table, and then the screaming started again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was the sound of a goddess waking up. The silence that followed the screaming was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a crater after a meteor impact. The infirmary was gone. In its place stood a ruin of shattered glass and twisted metal, the roof blown open to the winter sky. Snowflakes drifted down, hissing as they touched the superheated stone floor. In the center of the wreckage, a beast stood. It was massive, towering over the debris, a wolf of pure, blinding white. Its fur shimmered like diamond dust, and its eyes were not gold, but a luminous, celestial silver. It was a creature of myth, a moon caller, the apex of all lupine kind. Beneath the great beast's paws lay Tiberius. The Alpha King looked small in comparison. His skin was grey, his breathing shallow. The transfer of power had been catastrophic. He had poured his immortality, his dominance, and his very life force into the void of the curse to shatter it. The white wolf lowered its massive head, nudging Tiberius's chest. A low whine escaped its throat, a sound of devastating grief. Then, with a shimmer of light, the wolf dissolved. Leora stood there. She was no longer the frail girl in the servant's dress. Her hair had turned a stark, shocking white, floating around her as if suspended in water. Her skin glowed with an inner moonlight. The scar on her neck was gone. She dropped to her knees in the rubble, pulling Tiberius's head into her lap. "Tiberius!" she wept, her tears glowing like liquid silver. "Wake up! Please! Wake up!" Varian Mistfall scrambled over a pile of bricks, his face bloody from the explosion. "My king!" He stopped dead when he saw Leora. The sheer power radiating off her hit him like a physical wind, forcing him to his knees. His wolf whined in submission instantly. "He's cold," Leora whispered, looking at Varian with terrifying silver eyes. "Why is he cold?" "He gave you everything," Varian choked out, fighting the urge to press his forehead to the ground. "He is empty, my queen. He is mortal." Leora placed her hand over Tiberius's heart. She could feel the faint, struggling beat. It was the heartbeat of a man, not a monster. "No," Leora said. The word carried the weight of a command. She closed her eyes and reached into the well of power that was now overflowing within her. It was vast, ancient, and cold as the dark side of the moon. She didn't know how to use it, but instinct took over. She didn't give him power back. That would kill him again. Instead, she tethered him. She wove a thread of her own soul around his heart, binding him to her. "You do not leave me," she projected into his mind. "I forbid it." Tiberius gasped. His eyes flew open. They were no longer the burning gold of the Alpha King. They were a deep, human hazel. He looked up at her, dazed. He saw the white hair, the silver eyes, the raw power that was bending the light around her. He reached up, his hand trembling, to touch her face. "My moon," he rasped, his voice weak but alive. Leora sobbed, burying her face in his neck. "You idiot! You beautiful, stupid idiot!" Tiberius laughed, a rough, coughing sound. "I told you, I would burn the world." "You burned yourself," she scolded, pulling back to look at him. "Worth it," he whispered, staring at her with reverence. "To see you like this? Worth it." Varian cleared his throat, struggling to stand under the pressure of Leora's aura. "Sire, my queen, we have a problem." "What?" Leora asked, her voice sharpening. The air around her crackled. "The explosion," Varian gestured to the open sky. "The energy signature. Every pack within 1,000 miles just felt a white wolf wake up. And the High Council," he looked grim. "They aren't coming to celebrate. They're coming to execute." Tiberius tried to sit up, wincing. "They will try. You cannot fight them," Leora said, pushing him back down gently. "You can barely lift your head." "I don't need to fight them," Tiberius said, a shadow of his old smirk returning. "I have you." They arrived at dusk, just as the sun dipped below the frozen horizon. The High Council did not travel in convoys. They traveled by helicopter, 5 sleek black machines, descending onto the snow-covered lawn of the Silverfang Manor. They brought with them an army, 50 enforcers, the elite of the elite, wolves bred for war and loyalty to the Council alone. Leora stood on the front steps, wrapped in a long coat of white fur that matched her hair. Tiberius sat in a chair beside her. He was pale, wrapped in blankets, looking for all the world like a dying king. Varian stood on his other side, blades drawn. The pack, what was left of it, stood behind them. They were terrified, but they did not run. They had seen what Leora was. They had felt the shift in the world. 5 figures emerged from the helicopters, the council elders. They wore robes of crimson and gold, their faces masked in porcelain, a tradition meant to strip them of humanity and make them the face of the law. The lead elder, a man named Malachor, stepped forward. He removed his mask, revealing a scarred face and eyes hard as flint. "Tiberius Crestfall," Malachor boomed. "You have broken the accords. You have murdered a ruling alpha without trial, and worse." He turned his gaze to Leora. "You have harbored an abomination." "Careful, Malachor," Tiberius said, his voice lacking its old thunder, but carrying a new, dangerous edge. "You are speaking to your queen." Malachor laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. "Queen? The white wolves were hunted to extinction for a reason. They are unstable. They are too powerful. They disrupt the balance. She is a threat to our existence." He pointed a gloved hand at Leora. "Surrender her to us for execution, Tiberius, and we may let you live out your remaining mortal days in exile. Refuse, and we will burn this valley to glass." Leora stepped forward. The snow did not crunch beneath her boots. It melted. "You speak of balance," Leora said. Her voice was not loud, but it echoed in the ears of every wolf on the lawn, a telepathic broadcast. "But you allowed Uriel Darkwood to torture his own pack for a decade. You allowed him to kill my parents because they threatened his power. Where was your balance then?" "The internal affairs of a pack are not our concern," Malachor sneered. "But a moon caller is. Enforcers!" The 50 soldiers stepped forward, their eyes glowing red, their shifting bones cracking. "Take her head," Malachor commanded. "No," Leora said. She didn't shout. She simply spoke the word with the full weight of her lineage. She released the aura she had been holding back. It hit the enforcers like a tidal wave. It wasn't just fear, it was biology. A white wolf was not just an alpha. They were the primordial alpha. Their authority was written into the DNA of every wolf born since the beginning of time. The front line of enforcers faltered. Some dropped to their knees, clutching their heads as their wolves whined in submission, fighting the order to attack. Malachor's eyes widened. "It's stronger than we thought. Kill her! Don't let her speak! Fire!" The enforcers who were strong enough to resist, about 20 of them, pulled automatic rifles from their tactical vests. They weren't taking chances with claws. They were using silver bullets. "Leora!" Tiberius roared, trying to lunge from his chair. Time seemed to slow. Leora saw the muzzles flash. She saw the bullets cutting through the winter air. She didn't dodge. She raised her hand. A wall of translucent silver energy erupted from the ground in front of her. The bullets hit the barrier and disintegrated into dust. Leora opened her eyes, and they were blazing. "My turn," she whispered. Leora dropped the barrier and screamed, a sound that shifted into a howl that shattered the windows of the manor behind her. She shifted. The transformation was instantaneous. One heartbeat she was a woman, the next she was the white wolf, standing 10 feet tall at the shoulder, a creature of pure moonlight and rage. She leaped. She cleared the distance between the steps and the enforcers in a single bound. She didn't bite. She slammed into the earth. The impact sent a shockwave through the ground that knocked the gunmen off their feet. The battle descended into chaos. The Silverfang pack, inspired by their queen, charged. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they were fighting for survival. Varian was a blur of steel, cutting through the enforcers who tried to flank the manor. But Tiberius was the surprise. The council thought him weak. They thought him a cripple. Malachor, seeing Leora distracted by the soldiers, drew a jagged silver dagger and sprinted toward the king. "Die, old man," Malachor screamed, lunging for Tiberius's throat. Tiberius didn't shift. He didn't have the energy, but he had 300 years of combat experience. He caught Malachor's wrist with his left hand, twisting it with a sickening crunch. Malachor shrieked, dropping the knife. Tiberius caught the blade in midair with his right hand and drove it upward, under Malachor's ribs, piercing the heart. "I may be mortal," Tiberius snarled into the dying elder's face, "but I am still the king." He shoved the body away and stood up, swaying slightly. Across the battlefield, the other 4 elders had shifted into massive grey wolves. They were coordinating their attack, circling the white wolf. They were ancient, powerful, and fast. They bit at Leora's flanks, drawing silver blood. Leora roared in pain, thrashing. She was powerful, but she was new. She didn't know how to fight 4 alphas at once. One of the elders clamped his jaws onto her back leg, trying to hamstring her. Another lunged for her throat. "Leora!" Tiberius yelled. "Use the voice! Command them!" Leora heard him through the haze of battle. Command them. She wasn't just fighting enemies. She was fighting subjects. She stopped thrashing. She planted her feet. She ignored the pain of the teeth in her leg. She looked up at the moon, which was rising full and bright above the smoke. She drew in a breath that sucked the oxygen out of the air. "Submit!" The command didn't come from her throat. It came from the sky. It came from the earth. It vibrated in the marrow of every living thing in the valley. The effect was instantaneous. The elder, biting her leg, released his grip and collapsed, whining, his belly pressed to the snow. The elder, lunging for her throat, fell out of the air, crashing to the ground, paralyzed by the absolute compulsion of the order. The enforcers dropped their weapons. The Silverfang wolves fell to their knees. Even Varian bowed his head, unable to look at her. Silence returned to the valley. Leora stood alone in the center of a field of prostrate wolves. She breathed heavily, steam rising from her white fur. Slowly she shifted back. She stood naked in the snow, unbothered by the cold, her body glowing. She walked over to the elders who were shivering, unable to move. "The council is dissolved," Leora said, her voice carrying across the silence. "There will be no more masks. There will be no more purging of bloodlines. There is one law now." She turned to look at Tiberius, who was leaning against the stone railing, clutching his side, smiling through the blood on his face. "Protect the pack," Leora said, "or answer to me." She walked to Tiberius. The pack parted for her, heads lowered in awe. She reached him and collapsed into his arms. He caught her, sliding down the wall until they were both sitting on the cold stone. "You did it," Tiberius whispered, stroking her hair. "You ended the war." "We did it," Leora corrected. resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm tired, Tiberius." "Sleep, my moon." He kissed the top of her head. "I'll watch over you." "But you're mortal," she murmured, her eyes closing. "I know." Tiberius smiled, looking at the moon. "For the first time in 3 centuries, I have something to lose. And that makes me more dangerous than ever." The snow that winter melted into a spring that was greener than any in living memory. The Silverfang pack did not just survive, it thrived. The manor was rebuilt, not as a fortress of fear, but as a sanctuary. The cellar where Leora had once frozen was filled with concrete and sealed forever. Tiberius did not regain his immortality, but he gained something better: a life. He aged slowly but surely, silver threading his dark hair, lines of laughter appearing around his eyes that never left his queen. He ruled not with an iron fist, but with the wisdom of a man who knew the value of time. Leora, the White Wolf, the Moon Caller, became a legend not of terror, but of justice. She taught the pack that strength was not in silence, but in speaking. She taught them that scars were not shame, but history. On quiet nights, they would sit on the veranda, watching the moon rise. "Do you regret it?" Leora asked him once, tracing the lines of his aging hand. "Giving it up?" Tiberius looked at her, the girl who had scrubbed his floors, the woman who had saved his soul. "Who hurt you?" he whispered, the old question that had started it all. Leora smiled, a smile that reached her silver eyes. "No one. Not anymore." "Then I regret nothing," he said. "They say love conquers all, but in the northern territories, they know better. Love doesn't just conquer, it transforms. It takes the broken things, the forgotten things, the things hidden in the dark, and turns them into kings and queens. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of romance, magic, and redemption. Let the moon guide you."